Mick Donnelly and Viktor Krasniqi ignited a deadly war on the streets of Liverpool, where loyalty meant nothing, betrayal was everywhere, and the city became a battlefield in the ultimate clash between local gangs and the ruthless Albanian Mafia. Please subscribe and share for daily new update of gang crime story, and watch till end. Liverpool had always been a city of contrasts. Bright lights reflected off the wet cobblestones. Children played near the docks during the day, and merchants unloaded goods from massive cargo ships. But when night fell, the city's underbelly came alive. It thrived in shadows, in alleys where whispers carried more weight than voices. For years, gangs had carved their territories quietly, controlling drug trade, protection rackets, and illegal gambling. Mick Donnelly was one of the city's most feared figures. Known for his ruthless efficiency and iron-fisted control, he had inherited his position from older gangsters who had ruled the streets for decades. Mick was careful, calculating, and never underestimated anyone. But even he had not seen the storm that was about to descend on Liverpool. Viktor Krasniqi arrived quietly at first. An Albanian with sharp eyes and sharper instincts, he had spent years building his criminal empire across Europe. His crew was small, but each member was highly trained, disciplined, and utterly loyal. They had come to Liverpool not by accident, but by design. The city's thriving port, unpolished neighborhoods, and lucrative underground economy offered the perfect opportunity to expand. Viktor had studied the city for months, mapping Mick's operations, noting his strengths, and uncovering weaknesses. To him, Liverpool was more than a city. It was a prize waiting to be claimed. The first signs of the collision were subtle. Late-night deliveries were intercepted, shipments delayed, and local informants reported sightings of strangers, asking detailed questions about Mick's territory. Residents noticed unusual activity black SUVs parked for hours near abandoned warehouses, shadows moving where they shouldn't. For Mick, these were clear signs. He had encountered many threats in his life, but the precision of Viktor's movements suggested a level of sophistication he had rarely seen in local rivals. It was not a simple gang trying to take a street corner. This was organized, international, and dangerous. Tensions simmered in the city. Local pubs that had once felt safe now hosted whispered conversations about Albanian men seen walking the docks at night, watching, waiting. Small skirmishes began. A minor warehouse raid, a fight over a shipment. A few men disappearing only to return beaten. It was the opening salvo in a war neither side could ignore. Citizens caught in the middle grew fearful, their daily routines punctuated by distant gunshots and the rumble of engines disappearing into the night. Mick understood that to survive, he would have to be smarter, faster, and more brutal than ever before. By the end of the week, both sides were preparing for escalation. Viktor's crew moved with a purpose, quietly recruiting local enforcers and gaining allies who valued profit over loyalty. Mick, sensing the threat, reinforced his network, arming trusted men and doubling surveillance in key areas. Liverpool's streets, once lively with life, began to take on a tense, almost cinematic air. Every shadow seemed suspicious, every stranger a potential spy. The stage was set for a war that would leave the city scarred, where ordinary residents would witness the chilling consequences of a battle between two unstoppable forces. The first strike came on a night that seemed ordinary at first. Rain-slicked streets reflected the glow of streetlights, and the distant hum of the Mersey River mixed with the faint sound of cargo cranes at the docks. Mick's men were scattered across the city, checking shipments, collecting payments, and keeping an eye on known Albanian contacts. No one suspected the storm that was about to hit until the explosions began. It started with a deafening blast that shook the windows of nearby warehouses. Flames erupted along the docks as a shipment truck carrying valuable contraband was reduced to rubble. Smoke thickened the night air, choking anyone who approached, while the smell of burning fuel lingered like a warning. Mick's men ran toward the scene, only to find chaos. Bodies were scattered, men groaning in pain, and the unmistakable signs of a meticulously planned attack. Viktor's crew had chosen the moment perfectly. The middle of the night, few witnesses, and maximum impact. The message was clear. This was not a warning. It was a declaration of war. Mick felt a surge of anger, unlike anything he had experienced before. He knew the Albanians were organized, but the precision of the attack revealed more than strategy, it revealed confidence. Viktor was not just challenging him. He was daring him, testing the limits of his power. Every corner of Mick's operation felt threatened. Safe houses were no longer safe. Shipments required extra guards, and every transaction carried risk. The streets of Liverpool, usually bustling with quiet criminal deals, had turned into a theater of terror. The city itself reacted almost immediately. Residents awoke to the crackle of sirens and the distant roar of engines disappearing into the night. Business owners shuttered windows and doors earlier than usual, wary of getting caught in crossfire. Rumors spread faster than the flames from the truck. Masked men with guns, a foreign gang taking over, and blood already spilled. Fear was infectious. Even those who had never interacted with Mick or Viktor felt the tension, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Mick, however, did not allow fear to dictate his actions. Within hours, he gathered his closest lieutenants. They scouted the docks, identified possible Albanian hideouts, and analyzed patterns of the attack. Every detail mattered. Every mistake could cost lives. They knew retaliation would come, and it had to be calculated, precise, and unavoidable. Mick's reputation depended on it. Failure would not just mean loss of territory. It could mean death, not only for him, but for everyone who had sworn loyalty to him. Meanwhile, Viktor's team had already melted into the shadows, their work complete. They had achieved their goal, instilling terror, weakening morale, and proving their dominance. But they knew this was just the beginning. The streets of Liverpool would never be the same. Mick would respond, and when he did, it would escalate the violence to levels neither side could fully control. The city, caught in the crossfire, was about to witness a war where every alley, warehouse, and street corner could turn deadly in an instant. By the time dawn broke, the damage was clear. Liverpool's waterfront bore the scars of the first strike. Smoke still lingered in the cold morning air, and whispers of the Albanian Mafia spread like wildfire. Mick's grip on the city was challenged, his patience tested, and the war that had only begun promised a path of destruction unlike anything the city had seen before. The days following the first strike were tense and unpredictable. Mick moved through Liverpool like a predator, watching, listening, and testing the loyalty of those around him. Every shadow, every unfamiliar face carried a threat. He reached out to old allies, small-time gangs that had once been rivals, to create a united front against the Albanian intrusion. Offers of money, protection, and influence were made, but loyalty in Liverpool's underworld was fragile. Some accepted, seeing the opportunity to profit, while others hesitated, unsure if Mick could survive the wrath of Viktor Krasniqi and his ruthless crew. Meanwhile, Viktor was consolidating power on his side. He had arrived with only a handful of men, but his ability to recruit quickly from Albanian networks in Manchester and beyond allowed him to grow his presence rapidly. His crew was disciplined, and each new recruit was tested rigorously before being trusted with critical tasks. Unlike Mick, whose strength relied on reputation and intimidation, Viktor's influence came from precision, planning, and the promise of rewards for loyalty. He was methodical, knowing that rushing would provoke mistakes, yet patient, allowing fear to spread before making his next move. Within Mick's inner circle, cracks began to form. Darren Hughes, a trusted lieutenant, began to question Mick's decisions. He saw the Albanian Mafia as a more profitable and modern organization, one that could rise above the fragmented local gangs. Secretly, Darren began feeding information to Viktor's shipment schedules, hideout locations, and the weaknesses in Mick's defenses. Mick remained unaware of the betrayal, believing that those closest to him would die before harming him. But in the shadows, Darren's loyalty had shifted, and every move he made was sharpening the knife aimed at Mick's empire. Tension escalated as small skirmishes erupted across the city. Conflicts over territory, minor drug deals, and public displays of force became more frequent. Residents began avoiding certain streets entirely, fearful of random shootings or violent reprisals. Business owners shuttered their shops earlier, and police patrols increased, though they could do little to stop the shadow war unfolding before them. Mick and Viktor's influence reached every corner of Liverpool, and ordinary citizens became unwilling witnesses to a deadly struggle. By the end of the week, both sides were preparing for larger moves. Mick reinforced his warehouses and safe houses, arming his men with new weapons and doubling the number of lookouts. He studied patterns of Albanian movements, attempting to predict their next strike. Viktor, confident in his inside information from Darren, made bold plans to disrupt key shipments and expand control over neighborhoods that had once been Mick's strongholds. The city had become a chessboard, and every piece moved with deadly consequences. What neither Mick nor Viktor fully understood was the effect of betrayal on morale. The Albanian crew, aware that they had a spy in Mick's camp, felt a surge of power and invincibility. Mick's men, unaware of the leak, worked tirelessly, believing they were defending their empire. This imbalance would soon tilt the war in unexpected ways. Alliances were fragile, loyalty was a commodity, and the streets of Liverpool were now a dangerous arena where one misstep could cost lives. The stage was set. Both gangs were armed, informed, and ready for the next wave of attacks. Fear and suspicion hung heavy in the city like a storm cloud, waiting to break. Every move, every decision, carried weight. One wrong step could ignite a chain reaction of violence that would engulf Liverpool completely. The waterfront, once the lifeblood of Liverpool's trade, became a battlefield. Ships unloaded cargo during the day, but at night the docks belonged to gangs. Mick had long relied on the area for shipments, protection, and influence, believing that his deep-rooted knowledge of the territory gave him an advantage. He was wrong. Viktor's men struck under the cover of darkness, taking advantage of the fog that rolled off the Mersey River. The first signs were subtle: missing shipments, discarded packaging, and traces of footprints that led nowhere. Then came the ambush that would leave the city shaken. It was early morning when the first shots rang out, echoing against the warehouses. Mick's men were caught off guard, many injured before they could react. Explosives planted beneath a shipment truck tore through metal and wood, sending splinters flying and flames licking the night sky. The fire reflected in the water, casting an eerie glow across the deserted docks. Citizens who lived nearby awoke to the sound of explosions and gunfire, the terror on their faces matching the chaos unfolding in front of them. Mick arrived at the scene quickly, his heart pounding with fury. The Albanians had not just attacked his men. They had sent a message. Each body, each destroyed shipment, was a declaration of intent. Viktor Krasniqi was telling the city that the Albanian Mafia had arrived, and that Liverpool would no longer belong to local gangs. Mick could see the fear in the eyes of his men, a reflection of the helplessness he felt himself. Every corner of the docks felt exposed, and every alley could hide an enemy. The ambush was over in minutes, but the aftermath lingered. The police arrived too late to prevent the carnage, their sirens blending with the distant roar of engines as Viktor's crew melted into the shadows. Evidence was minimal, witnesses terrified, and the streets became a ghost town. Mick walked among the debris, calculating, planning, and vowing retribution. This attack could not go unanswered. Each moment he delayed, Viktor gained power, and the Albanian crew grew bolder with every strike. In the following days, rumors spread like wildfire. Local businesses spoke in hushed tones about masked men, foreign accents, and explosions in places where no one had expected violence. The docks, once a symbol of Liverpool's thriving economy, had transformed into a war zone. Mick reinforced key areas, armed his men with heavier weapons, and began mapping out possible Albanian hideouts. But Viktor had already anticipated retaliation. Every move Mick made seemed countered before it could even be executed, revealing a level of strategy that unnerved even the most seasoned gangsters. The citizens of Liverpool, caught in the crossfire, began changing their routines. Parents kept children inside, shopkeepers locked doors hours before closing, and the city's nightlife dwindled under fear. Yet, amidst the chaos, Mick realized something crucial. He could not allow fear to control him. If he hesitated, the Albanians would continue to expand, and his empire would crumble from within. The waterfront had become more than a battlefield. It was a test of resilience, strategy, and ruthlessness. By the time dawn broke over the river, the docks were smoldering ruins. Mick's men counted the losses, tended to the injured, and prepared for retaliation. Viktor Krasniqi had made his mark, but the war was far from over. Liverpool's underworld had been shaken to its core, and the collision between two ruthless powers had only just begun. Mick could not let the Albanian strike go unanswered. The docks were a scar on Liverpool, a reminder that his control could be challenged and broken. He spent days studying the patterns of Viktor's crew, tracking movements and listening to whispers from informants who had remained loyal despite the chaos. Every detail mattered: the routes used to transport contraband, the timing of shipments, even the brands of cars preferred by Viktor's men. Mick's mind worked like a machine, calculating the perfect moment to strike back. He chose a deserted safe house on the outskirts of the city as the target. It was heavily guarded but isolated enough that an attack could be swift and deadly. Mick's crew prepared meticulously. They moved quietly, armed with weapons designed to cause maximum damage while minimizing exposure. Explosives were placed strategically, escape routes were planned, and lookouts stationed in nearby buildings ensured no interruptions. Mick knew that hesitation could cost lives, and precision was the only way to send a message that would rival Viktor's first strike. The night of the attack was moonless, and the streets were empty. Mick led his crew through narrow alleys, the sound of wet shoes muffled by the rain. As they approached the safe house, the tension became almost tangible. Every shadow seemed to hide an enemy, every window a potential sniper point. Without warning, Mick signaled his men, and the attack began. Gunfire erupted, sharp and controlled, cutting through the silence of the night. Explosions followed, tearing through the building with a force that rattled nearby windows and set fire to stored contraband. Flames licked the walls, and thick smoke curled into the sky, visible for miles. Viktor's men were caught by surprise. Some tried to fight back, but Mick's team had anticipated their positions. Chaos ensued inside the building: shouts, scuffling, and the sound of heavy objects crashing to the floor. By the time the smoke cleared, the safe house was in ruins. Equipment destroyed, weapons scattered, and the Albanians forced to flee, many injured in the rush to escape. Mick's message was clear: any attack on his territory would be met with equal or greater force. The aftermath rippled across the city. Liverpool's streets felt different. The usual quiet hum of the night had been replaced by the memory of violence. Residents avoided the areas near the docks and outskirts, fearful that the war was far from over. Police investigations began, but witnesses were scarce, and evidence was minimal. Mick had planned the strike to be surgical, leaving only destruction and fear in its wake. Viktor would know that this was personal. Yet, the attack did not end the conflict. It only escalated it. Mick understood that Viktor's crew would recover, regroup, and strike back with even greater ferocity. The war had become a deadly cycle, where every action demanded retaliation and every retaliation increased the stakes. The city itself had become a participant in the battle, its streets, alleys, and buildings silent witnesses to the unfolding underworld war. Liverpool would never be the same, and the collision between Mick Donnelly and Viktor Krasniqi had only begun to leave permanent scars. The war between Mick and Viktor had escalated beyond control, and trust became the rarest commodity in Liverpool's underworld. The city had grown quiet in a tense, unnatural way. Residents avoided streets once bustling with life, and whispers of Albanian spies spread like wildfire. Darren Hughes had been a trusted lieutenant for years, a man Mick had relied on during the bloodiest chapters of his rise. Now, Darren was feeding Viktor critical information, carefully calculated to avoid detection while maximizing damage. Detectives investigating the surge in gang violence had begun to notice patterns. Explosives, attacks, and shipments destroyed were no longer random. They had intelligence behind them. Surveillance footage showed unusual movements near key warehouses, and forensic evidence hinted at inside help. Darren's duplicity, however, remained hidden. He played the role of loyal enforcer flawlessly, offering advice, warning of potential Albanian traps, and positioning himself as indispensable. Mick, caught in the momentum of retaliation and planning, never suspected betrayal from the one man he had trusted most. Mick's men tried to anticipate their moves, but Viktor's advantage had grown with the inside information provided by Darren. The streets of Liverpool, once a familiar battlefield for Mick, now felt like a maze controlled by an invisible hand. Every ambush, every destroyed shipment, carried the subtle fingerprint of betrayal. But betrayal has a way of demanding a price. Darren had underestimated the dangers of being caught between two ruthless leaders. Viktor relied on him for information, but in the violent underworld, loyalty was never guaranteed. The moment Darren's usefulness began to wane, whispers reached Mick through channels Darren could not control. He had no concrete proof yet, but a sense of unease began to gnaw at him. The slightest mistake could expose Darren, and Mick's retribution would be merciless. Before anything could be resolved, Darren met a violent end. A staged prison accident left him dead, and the news traveled quickly through both gangs. Mick never learned the full truth, but the effect was immediate. Fear rippled through his crew. If betrayal could go unpunished in the underworld, no one was safe. Viktor's men, aware that their inside source had been silenced, realized the stakes were higher than ever. Both sides understood that mistakes or disloyalty were punished with blood. The balance of power shifted subtly, fear replacing certainty, and paranoia infecting every plan. The city of Liverpool, already reeling from explosions, gunfire, and burned-out warehouses, now faced the psychological toll of betrayal and ruthless retaliation. Mick's men tightened their ranks, loyalists proving their worth under extreme pressure. The streets themselves seemed to pulse with tension, the air heavy with anticipation. Every alley, every shadow, now held the possibility of death. The final showdown was inevitable. Both gangs had been pushed to the brink, and Liverpool itself had become a silent witness to months of bloodshed. Mick had spent days gathering intelligence, tracking every move of Viktor's crew, studying patterns, and reinforcing his loyal men. The docks, warehouses, and backstreets had been abandoned by ordinary citizens, leaving the city in a tense, ghostly silence. Every creaking door, every distant engine, could signal an attack. Mick knew this confrontation could not fail. It was not just about territory, it was about survival and reputation. Viktor, equally prepared, had brought his crew to a deserted warehouse near the Mersey River, chosen for its strategic location and its potential as a trap. He had anticipated Mick's tactics and laid plans for ambushes, escape routes, and distractions. The Albanian crew moved with precision, their discipline a sharp contrast to the chaos of months of skirmishes. Each man knew his role, each step planned to counter any Liverpool strategy. Viktor himself remained calm, watching through reinforced windows as shadows moved outside, calculating when to strike. Mick arrived under the cover of darkness, leading a small, highly trained team. They approached silently, scanning the perimeter and checking every angle. Gunfire erupted suddenly, a warning and a test. Mick's men returned fire, diving behind crates and barrels for cover. Explosions shook the building as both sides unleashed carefully prepared traps. The sounds of violence crashing metal, shattering glass, gunfire, and shouted commands echoed through the empty streets, bouncing off the river and abandoned warehouses. Inside the warehouse, chaos reigned. Mick moved methodically, his eyes sharp, calculating every move. Viktor's men fought with equal intensity, their training evident in every dodge, every counterattack. Sparks flew from overturned crates, flames licked the walls from a nearby fire, and the air was thick with smoke and tension. Mick came face to face with Viktor briefly, both men realizing that this moment had been inevitable. A silent recognition passed between them, neither would yield easily, and only one to dominate. Minutes stretched like hours. Each side suffered injuries. Some men fell, others barely escaped, but the fight continued. Mick's tactical strikes caused havoc, destroying key supplies, but Viktor's crew adapted, moving with agility and using the building's layout to their advantage. The confrontation became less about territory and more about dominance, each man testing the limits of the other's skill, resilience, and ruthlessness. By the time the first light of dawn touched the Mersey River, the warehouse was a ruin. Smoke rose in thick plumes, crates were destroyed, and the remnants of fire littered the floor. Viktor and a few of his men had escaped into the foggy morning, leaving Mick battered but alive. The battle had ended for now, but the war was far from over. Mick surveyed the destruction, aware that the Albanians were not defeated. They had survived, learned, and would return. Liverpool had witnessed a clash of empires, a collision that had scarred its streets and its people, and both sides knew that the next confrontation could be even more brutal. The city of Liverpool slowly began to wake from the chaos, but the scars of the Underworld war were everywhere. Streets that had once hummed with life were now eerily quiet. Burned-out warehouses, shattered windows, and abandoned vehicles marked the battlegrounds where Mick and Viktor's crews had clashed. Ordinary citizens moved cautiously, glancing over their shoulders at shadows that could conceal a gun, a knife, or a lurking enemy. The collision between two ruthless powers had left more than physical damage. It had transformed the city's atmosphere into one of fear and uncertainty. Mick surveyed the aftermath from his office high above the docks, the weight of leadership pressing heavily on him. His men were recovering from injuries, tallying losses, and securing what remained of their operations. For Mick, the war had become more than a struggle for territory. It was a test of survival, strategy, and dominance. Every decision, every action carried consequences that could ripple across the city for weeks or months. He knew Viktor had escaped, but the Albanian crew's temporary retreat did not mean peace. Viktor had survived, learned from the battle, and would return stronger, smarter, and more determined. Viktor, meanwhile, regrouped with the remnants of his crew in Manchester. His injuries were minimal, but his mind was sharp, analyzing every misstep from the showdown. The safe houses destroyed, shipments lost, and men injured were setbacks, but not defeats. Viktor understood that patience and intelligence were as powerful as violence. He began planning for the next wave, knowing that controlling Liverpool required more than brute force. It required influence, strategy, and alliances that extended beyond the city. His crew, loyal and disciplined, absorbed his plans with a quiet intensity, ready to strike when the moment was right. The psychological impact on Mick's crew was profound. They had faced death and destruction, fought in fire and smoke, and witnessed the brutal efficiency of an enemy they could not fully predict. Fear, however, had become a weapon of its own. Mick reinforced loyalty, reminding his men that survival depended on unity, discipline, and swift action. Any hesitation, any misstep, could be fatal. He knew that in the underworld, respect was earned through power, and fear, and the collision with the Albanian Mafia had raised the stakes to unprecedented levels. As the weeks passed, Liverpool began to return to a semblance of normality on the surface. Shops reopened, streetlights flickered back to life, and the hum of the city returned. Yet beneath the surface, the tension never fully dissipated. Rumors of Albanian scouts, new alliances, and potential attacks kept Mick vigilant. Citizens spoke in hushed tones about the recent war, aware that the streets they walked could still be battlegrounds. The collision of these criminal empires had permanently altered the city, leaving an invisible mark of fear that lingered long after the fires were extinguished. Mick knew this was only the beginning. The Albanian Mafia had proven they could strike with precision and vanish into the shadows. Liverpool's underworld would never be the same, and both sides understood that the next confrontation could surpass the destruction they had already witnessed. The war had not ended. It had evolved. And in the heart of the city, under the quiet surface of normal life, the battle lines were already being redrawn. The collision of empires had left scars that could not heal, a constant reminder that in the underworld, survival demanded ruthless strategy, unwavering loyalty, and a willingness to do whatever it took to stay alive.